being here today. This is a great turnout. We appreciate it very much. This campaign is, I think it's fair to say, a very different type of campaign than we have seen in recent history. That's a good thing, I agree. And what makes the campaign different is that I am here not just to ask for your support in Iowa, and I'm not here just to ask for your support to help me win the Democratic nomination or win the general election. I'm asking more of you. I am asking of you to join me in creating a political revolution in this country. Which goes beyond electing me or anybody else to be president, because I'm going to tell you now a truth that no other candidate for president will tell you. And that is, if we are going to do what is right for working families and the middle class, we need to understand that the powers that be in Washington, and that is corporate America, Wall Street, the large campaign donors, are so powerful that no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone. What we need, and what this campaign is about, is asking millions of people, many of whom, by the way, have given up on the political process, to come back in and to say that in our great country, our government belongs to all of the people and not just a handful of billionaires. I am asking for your help, not just in the campaign. I'm asking for your help the day after the election. Now, what we are trying to do in this campaign is not just run a bumper sticker type campaign. What we're trying to do is to talk about the most serious issues facing our country in a serious way and to figure out the best path forward. And that's what I want to do this afternoon, and after I stop, I'll be happy to take some of your comments and your questions. Let's throw it out on the table, tell you what we're running up against in this campaign. As I see it, when you take on the establishment, you're taking on three separate sections, but they're all interrelated. Economically, what we are taking on is the reality in America that from an economic perspective, our country is moving toward an oligarchic form of society. You all know what I mean by that? Here are the facts. The facts are that today, the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. In America today, a study just came out a few weeks ago. The 20 wealthiest people in America own more wealth than the bottom half of America. All right? That's the economic reality that we're looking at. And politically, what are we looking at? Politically, what we are looking about is a system which, as a result of Citizens United, Supreme Court decision, says to the wealthiest people in this country, you already own much of the economy, now you have the opportunity to buy the United States government. You can spend as much money as you want. You have one vote. That's good. Koch brothers have one vote each, but they're going to spend another $900 million on this campaign cycle, electing people who represent their interest. And that tells me that not only are we moving toward an economic oligarchy, a nation in which a handful of families own much of the economy, we are moving toward a political oligarchy, where a handful of families are playing a huge role to help elect candidates who represent their interest. And on that regard, let me tell you something that I am enormously proud of, which is part of our political revolution. I was told that when we began this campaign, with zero money, by the way, they said, Bernie, you can't run an effective campaign. You can't raise money unless you have a super PAC. Why do you want to waste your time talking to hundreds of people or thousands of people? In this campaign, we have talked to over 400,000 people all over America. Why do you want to waste your time doing that? The reality is you've got to sit in a room with 20 wealthy people and leave that room with $5 million. That's the way politics is done today. That's the only way you win. You need a super PAC. Well, let me be very clear to you. I do not represent the interests of the billionaire class. I do not represent the interests of corporate America. I don't want their money. And what we have shown, and this is a revolution already taking place, 2 months before an election, what we have shown is you can raise not as much money as the other guys do, they're raising more, but you can raise enough money to run a winning campaign by having over 800,000 individuals in America make contributions, average contribution somewhere around $30 a piece. So we are showing that you can run a serious and winning national election without being beholden to the powerful and the wealthy. So when we talk about taking on the establishment, obviously we're taking on corporate America and Wall Street. Obviously we're taking on the political establishment. We're also taking on the media establishment. And let me just give you an example of what I mean. There was just a study that came out, I think it was yesterday, and they looked at the kind of coverage that different campaigns are getting from the national network news. And what ABC, it turns out, they looked at all of the major networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, etc. ABC, World News Tonight, during this campaign has devoted 81 minutes to the campaign of Donald Trump. 81 minutes. They have devoted 20 seconds to the campaign of Bernie Sanders. Less bad, but equally distorted in terms of other campaigns. Now, why is that? Well, I think there are 2 basic reasons. Number one, the message that we are trying to convey to the people of Iowa and the people of America is that we need a political revolution. We need a government that represents all of us, not just corporate America. We need to demand that the wealthy and the powerful start paying their fair share of taxes. Not a message that the corporately owned media necessarily wants to hear. But equally important, it is hard for media who are trying to do it well, those who are trying to do it well, and there are those, to put what we are trying to do into a 6-second soundbite. We're not talking in sound bites. We're talking about the real issues facing the American people. Yes, I can get up here and say, my goal is to ban this or that person from coming into America. A very simple statement, a very stupid statement. But it's a statement that can be put into a 6-second soundbite. I could give you another statement and tell you something horrific and ugly and disgusting, that all of our Mexican friends are quote-unquote criminals or rapists. That will get me media attention. But it is a disgusting statement that must be repudiated by everyone. So when we talk about the political revolution, coalition, what we have got to be figuring out is how do we have a serious discussion? These issues are complicated. I don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers. No candidate has all the answers. What are the issues? You know, politics in the real sense is not any different than when you feel sick, you go to a doctor. And what do you want from the doctor? You tell the doctor what your symptoms are, what your problems are. You want a good diagnosis. You want a treatment. That's all that government in a democratic society should be about. What are the problems? And how do we resolve those problems? How do we make it better? That's all that it is. And that's what democracy is supposed to be about. Democracy is not a soap opera. It's not a baseball game. It's not about how much money I make or maybe something dumb that I said 2 days ago. It's about the issues that affect your lives, your children's lives, your parents' lives. What are they? How do we determine them? How do we resolve them? And that's what we're trying to do in this campaign. Can't be boiled down to a 6-second soundbite. Let me just touch on some of the issues that we're talking about. The state of American democracy. We have seen, and I'm speaking as the former chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, and I will do everything that I can to make sure that every veteran in this country gets the health care and the benefits to which they are entitled. They put their lives on the line to defend us. But what I will tell you, and I've talked to veterans from World War II to Iraq and Afghanistan, is these men and women who are putting their lives on the line to defend our way of life, our democracy, they are nervous. They are nervous as I am and as you are about the state of American democracy. What does it mean? It means that in the last midterm election a year ago, 63% of the American people didn't vote. You know that? 63%, 80% of young people didn't vote. That when you look internationally, we have one of the lowest voter turnouts of any major country on earth. So the question that I throw out that I want you to be thinking about is how do we revitalize American democracy? How do we bring more people into the process? How do we get people arguing about where we should be going in a respectful way? How do we increase voter turnout so that we will have one of the highest voter turnouts in the world, not one of the lowest? How do we overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision? How do we move toward public funding of elections so that anybody in this room, regardless of your political views, you're progressive, conservative, moderate, I want you to be able to run for office without having to beg wealthy people for campaign contributions. And when we talk about economics, what is important to understand is that we live in a rigged economy. What does that mean? It means that despite a huge increase in technology, which has made every worker in this room much more productive than workers who had your job or similar jobs 20 years ago, everything being equal, many of you are working for longer hours for lower wages. Why is that? If I give you a good tool which makes you more productive, one of two things rationally should happen. Either your income goes up because you're producing more, or you're working fewer hours. And yet what's going on in this economy is that neither of those things are happening. People are working longer hours for lower wages. In my state, and I know here in Iowa, we have people working 2 or 3 jobs to cobble together an income to feed their families and maybe get some health care. A number of months ago, I was in Des Moines at the farmer's market there. It was a really wonderful farmer's market. Talked to a guy there whose job was to collect food that was not sold. And he took that food to the emergency food shelf. And I asked him, I said, tell me, what percentage of the people who go to the emergency food shelf are working? He said 90% are working. Got that? 90%. So it's not a question of people being unemployed, being homeless. They are working, but they are just not earning the kinds of income they need to feed their families. Are we in America slackers? Do we not work hard? I want everybody here to know. Japanese are very hard-working people. We have surpassed the Japanese. We now work the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world. Millions of our people are working 50, 60 hours a week, and yet median family income today is $4,000 less than it was in 1999. Why is that? Well, I think the bottom line is that we need to create an economy that works for working families and not just billionaires. Yes, and this is an important point that many of my Republican colleagues appear to have forgotten. The economy today is much better than it was when George W. Bush left office. My Republican friends seem to forget that we were losing 800,000 jobs a month, running up a $1.4 trillion deficit, and the world's financial system was on the verge of collapse. But we can forgive our Republican friends. They suffer from a very serious illness called amnesia. And their view is that anything that Obama does is terrible, and that we should forget about the kind of world that he inherited when he became president. But having said that, we also have to understand that for the last 40 years, on the Republican and Democratic administration, the middle class of this country has been disappearing. 47 million Americans are living in poverty, and today we have more income and wealth inequality than any major country on earth. That has got to change. It is not acceptable to me that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth at the same time as we're seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires. That's wrong. That has got to change. And when we talk about the economy and when we talk about wages, let me be very clear. A $7.25 federal minimum wage is a starvation wage. Minimum wage has got to be raised to a living wage, $15 an hour over the next several years. And when we talk about fair wages, I hope that every man in this room will stand with the women and fight for pay equity for women workers. There is no rational economic reason why women are making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. That is simply a vestige of old-fashioned sexism, and that is going to change. I know here in Iowa, you've got a lot of candidates running through your state. And you're hearing many of my Republican colleagues talking about family values. Have you ever talking about family values? They just love families. Just stay up nights. Especially if they're wealthy families who can make campaign contributions. But all of you know what Republicans mean when they talk about family values. What they are saying to every woman in this country is you cannot control your own body. That's wrong. I disagree. And when Republicans talk about family values, what they are also saying is that our gay brothers and sisters should not have the right to get married. I disagree. Now, I have been married to my wife, Jane, for 27 years. We have 4 great kids and 7 beautiful grandchildren. And we believe in family values, but our family values just a little bit different than Republican family values. And when I talk about family values, what I talk about is ending the international embarrassment of the United States being the only major country on earth that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave. You know, when you are talking about family values, what you're talking about is the ability of a mom and a dad to get to know their baby, to love their baby, to nourish their baby. But what happens in Iowa, happens in Vermont, happens all over America, is that today, if a woman gives birth and she does not have sufficient income, she is forced to go back to work in 1 week or in 2 weeks. She is forced to separate from her newborn baby. That is not a family value. That's the opposite of a family value. And that is why I support legislation which will provide 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave. When we talk about the economy and what's going on in America, let me talk about not just income and wealth inequality, but let me talk about unemployment. Now, every month, federal government comes out with a bunch of statistics, and what mostly appears on the front pages of papers is what is called official unemployment. I hope all of you know that official unemployment is very different from real unemployment. You all know that. The difference is that real unemployment includes those people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time, and those people who have given up looking for work entirely. Add that together, real unemployment in this country is not 5%, it is close to 10%. And then on top of that, take a hard look at youth unemployment in America. If you look at youth unemployment and underemployment for kids 17 to 20 who are high school graduates, if those kids are white, 33% unemployed or underemployed. If they are Hispanic, 36%. If they are African American, 51%. And if anyone in this room thinks there is not a direct correlation between that very, very high rate of youth unemployment and the fact that we have more people in jail than any other country on earth, you would be sorely mistaken. So here's what I think. Instead of putting more and more young people into jail, it makes more sense for us to be investing in jobs and education rather than in more incarceration. talk about unemployment being close to 10%, all of you know that our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our water systems, our wastewater plants, our rail system need massive investments. We used to lead the world in terms of the quality of our infrastructure. Now we are way down. I believe we should invest $1 trillion over 5 years to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, and when we do that, we create up to 13 million good-paying jobs. So I want you to envisage an America in which our roads and bridges are not crumbling, but in which they are state-of-the-art, where young people are out learning skills, rebuilding America. Now, when we talk about the other issues facing America, let me talk about one in a way that no other candidate is talking about. And that I believe, again, the United States must join the rest of the industrialized world and make certain that every man, woman, and child in this country has health care as a right, not a privilege. Now, I am on the committee, Health, Education, Labor Committee, that helped write the Affordable Care Act. I know something about it. And the Affordable Care Act has made significant progress in a number of areas. We've done away with the obscenity of so-called pre-existing conditions. Some 15 million Americans today have health insurance who otherwise would not. But the truth remains that 29 million Americans today still have no health insurance. And the truth is that many of the people in this room who do have health insurance are underinsured with high deductibles and high copayments. And the other truth, becoming increasingly obvious, is that we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Tell you a story. You want to hear a story? What else do we have to do? It's a Saturday afternoon. Let's tell some stories. All right, here's the story. About 15 years ago, late 1990s, when I was Vermont's congressman before I was in the Senate, I took a busload of mostly women from northern Vermont, which borders on Canada. I took them to Montreal. Why did I take them to Montreal? It wasn't a sightseeing tour. We had arranged a trip to a pharmacy in Montreal where these women bought prescription drugs, in many cases a drug called tamoxifen for breast cancer. It's a widely prescribed breast cancer drug. You know what the differential was in the prices they paid in Vermont and in Canada? They paid 1/10 of the price for the exact same medicine. 1/10 of the price. Today there are many, many drugs on the market which are being sold in Canada for half or third. And it's not just Canada, there are many countries all over the world. Now the reason that the pharmaceutical industry can charge us any prices they want, the reason for that is they can. And they will. And they do. So it doesn't matter if you are in desperate need of a drug. Give me an example. Former chairman of the Veterans Committee, hepatitis C, very serious illness for many of our veterans. A new drug came along from a company, an excellent drug, far better than what we had had before. You know what the company is charging for that drug? $1,000 a pill. VA is getting it cheaper, but still paying a whole lot of money. These guys are charging high prices because they can get away with it. Now, I believe that when people are dying in America, and we have had oncologists writing to us saying our cancer patients can't afford the drugs that are out there, when 1 out of 5 Americans is unable to afford the medicine their doctors are prescribing, I say it is time to end the drug company's ability to charge us any prices. I am running for president because I recognize, as all of you do, that we live in a highly competitive global economy, and that if our country is to do well economically now and in the future, we need to have the best educated workforce in the world. And I am running for president because it makes zero sense to me that there are hundreds of thousands of bright young people, some in Iowa, some in Vermont, some all over this country. Great kids who have done well in school, who are qualified to get a higher education, but they can't do it for one reason, and that is their families lack sufficient income. That is unfair to those young people and their families. It is stupid when we talk about the future of the American economy and wanting to capture the best intellectual capabilities that we can. That is why I have proposed and will make happen as president a process by which every public college and university will be tuition free. Obviously, I think it is obvious what that will mean to young people who want to go to college. But here is even the deeper point. My dad left Poland at the age of 17. He dropped out of school, never had much of an education. My mother did graduate high school. So I know what it's like to be the first or second in my family to go to college. All over this country, there are kids whose parents never went to college. And they're in the 3rd grade, and they're in the 5th grade, and they think that no matter how hard they study, college is as likely as going to the moon. They don't know anybody who ever went to college. It's a distant dream. And what I want is every kid in Iowa, every kid in Vermont, every kid in America to understand that if that boy or girl studies hard and does well in school, they will be able to go to college, will be able to make it to the middle class, regardless of the income of that family. And when we talk about higher education, let's talk about another absurdity. And the absurdity is that we have millions of people who have committed the crime, if you like, of getting a higher education, college, maybe graduate school, and their reward is they are now deeply in debt. I talk to young people in Vermont, in fact, all over the country. They're graduating college, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in debt. A couple of years ago, I was at a group of people in Vermont, talked to a young woman, and here was her problem. She always wanted to be a primary care physician working with low-income people. That's exactly what she's doing right now. She left medical school with $300,000 accumulated debt. Wow. I thought that was the top. I was in, I think it was Des Moines, a number of months ago. I think it was Des Moines. It was in Iowa. Gave a speech. A young woman comes up to me afterwards. She said, $300,000. I just graduated dental school. And God knows we need a lot of dentists in this country. She just graduated dental school, $400,000 in debt. That's pretty crazy stuff. Now here's the irony and the absurdity. People with student debt are now paying interest rates on that debt of 6, 8, in some cases 10%. But you can refinance your home at 3 or 4%. You can buy a car for lower interest rates than that. So what our legislation does is say that you should be able to refinance your student debt at the lowest interest rates you can find. In other words, we get the government out of profiteering on the backs of working families who sent their kids to college. Now, what I have described in terms of making public colleges and universities tuition-free and lowering student debt is in fact a pretty expensive proposition. I don't deny it. It's about $70 billion a year. That's a lot of money. How are we going to pay for that? Well, I'll tell you how we're going to pay for it. Back in 2008, as a result of the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior of Wall Street, this country was plunged into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. And Wall Street, because I was there, I was in the room, these guys came begging the United States Congress, bail us out, bail us out. And that's what the Congress did, that's my vote, and that is what the Fed did to the tune of trillions of dollars of low interest and zero interest loans. In my view, if the taxpayers and middle class of this country could bail out Wall Street in their time of need, now is the time for Wall Street to bail out the middle class of this country. Which is why this proposal will be paid for through a tax on Wall Street speculation. All of you are aware that as we speak, there is a major international conference winding down in Paris dealing with climate change. I believe that they have made some progress, but I really believe that they have not gone anywhere near as far as we have to go. And here's the simple truth. And I speak to you as a member of both the Energy Committee and the Environmental Committee, somebody who's had the opportunity to speak to scientists not only all over our country, but all over the world. And this is what the almost unanimous conclusion of the scientific community is. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. And climate change is already, today, causing massive problems in our country and around the world. That is not my opinion. That is not my opinion. That is the opinion of virtually the entire scientific community. And I believe that Pope Francis is right when he recently stated that if we don't get our act together, we are moving as a planet on a suicidal course, in a suicidal direction. What we have to do, and by the way, let me congratulate all of you here in Ireland, because you are some of the leaders in this country in helping us to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to sustainable energy. And I applaud you for being one of the leaders, if not the leader in the country. 29%, as I understand it, of your electricity now comes from wind. And you're certainly one of the leaders nationally and internationally in terms of biofuels. Keep up the great work. It's very clear what we have to do. And by the way, let's be very honest about this. You know, I got 7 grandchildren, who I love very much. What we are fighting for from a moral perspective, is the right for those kids and our grandchildren to live in a world which is healthy and inhabit. That is a moral responsibility that we have. And here's my nightmare. My nightmare is that 30, 40, 50 years from now, some of your grandchildren or great-grandchildren will look up and they'll say, why didn't they listen to the scientific community? They were told what was going to happen. Why didn't they do something? Why did they leave us a planet which is so unhealthy and so uninhabitable? Why did they allow more drought to take place, more flooding to take place? Why did they allow the sea levels to continue to rise, flooding coastal communities? Why did they allow for the acidification of the ocean and the huge impact that has on people's ability to eat food from the ocean? Why did they not listen to the CIA, who have told us very clearly that when there is less food to be grown because land is now overridden with drought, less water to be had, that people are going to migrate. And when people migrate, it causes international conflict and war. That's the future that will take place if we do not have the courage to transform our energy system. And let me kind of complete the circle here and tell you something. I'm being more partisan than I usually am. And that is this. I am on, obviously, by definition, I'm on many committees with my Republican colleagues, and it's, one of the more progressive, maybe the most progressive member of the U.S. Senate. My views are different than Republicans. That goes without saying. But what I also have to tell you is I'm on committees with Republicans, and we talk about Alzheimer's, the crisis of Alzheimer's, we talk about cancer research, we talk about diabetes, we talk about many issues. And I don't hear any Republicans making fun of cancer researchers or Alzheimer doctors. They listen, we may disagree about how you go forward. They're serious discussions. How does it happen that on the issue of climate change and climate change alone, almost all Republicans, not all, almost all are rejecting basic science? How does that happen? And I will tell you the answer. And the answer gets back to a corrupt campaign finance system. Republican colleagues are no dumber, no smarter than anybody else. They read the same literature, they hear the same evidence. But this is the truth. The truth is that if one of the Republican candidates for president stood up tomorrow and said, I just had a long talk with the scientists, climate change, it's real, we've got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. On the day that that Republican candidate makes that statement, money from the Koch brothers and money from the fossil fuel industry will be cut, and if that candidate is running for the House or the Senate, it is very likely that he or she will have to engage in a primary contest supported very heavily, their opponent being supported by the fossil fuel industry. That's the simple truth. And when I say to my Republican colleagues, I do understand the dilemma that they're in. But the truth is, they have got to start worrying more about their kids and their grandchildren than their campaign contributions. Because climate change is the greatest environmental challenge of our time, I oppose the Keystone XL pipeline from day one. And that is why here in Iowa I oppose the Bakken pipeline. Everybody here knows we live in a difficult and dangerous world. That has been the case for a long time. Everybody is aware of the barbarity of ISIS. Everybody is aware of the attack in Paris. Everybody is aware of what happened in San Bernardino. As President of the United States, I will defend this country, but I will defend it responsibly. What does that mean? It is the first duty of the President and Congress to defend this country and protect the safety of our people, something I take very seriously. But I think that those folks out there, often Republicans, who are telling the world how tough they are, only got about half of the story. Yeah, we gotta be tough, no question. But we also have to be smart. Now, I was in the U.S. House back in 2002. And I remember, as if it were yesterday, the debate that we had about Iraq. And what the argument was, is Saddam Hussein was an evil butcher, which is true. He's a terrible, terrible guy who has a lot of blood, had a lot of blood on his hands. And we heard many, many other things. And I listened very closely to what President Bush and Vice President Cheney and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld and all the rest had to say, because of all the votes you cast when you're in Congress, maybe the most important is war and peace, because you said it's sending young people off to put their lives in danger. And I listened very carefully. And if you're hearing all of the evidence, I voted against the war in Iraq. And if you go to YouTube or go to my website, listen to what I said back then about what my fears were in terms of the destabilization of that region. What would happen? Yeah, it was not that hard for the United States to overthrow Saddam Hussein. What happens the day after? That's the issue. And now we are dealing with a barbaric group called ISIS. I don't have to explain ISIS to any of you. You understand the beheadings, the sexual slavery, their brutality. What's the best way for people? Well, there are some people out there who say, we gotta be tough, we gotta send in our troops. Well, you know what? In my view, that is exactly what ISIS wants. They want to suck us into a perpetual war. And they can tell the entire Muslim world, we are fighting the West. And I think we have got to not fall for that bait. And this is what I think, not my idea. Listen to what people like King Abdullah of Jordan, who is, in my view, an incredible person, leading a heroic nation. Not only are they taking in huge numbers of refugees, very small country. This is what Abdullah said recently. He said, yes, international terrorism is by definition, Paris, etc., it is an international crisis. We all know that. He knows that. But he also said that we in the Muslim world, we have the obligation to lead the fight because we are fighting for the soul of Islam against those people who want to hijack that religion and convert it into a terrorist and demagogic religion. That is not Bernie Sanders. That's King Abdullah. So what does that mean? What is the best way to proceed? The nightmare, which I will strongly oppose, is sending U.S. combat troops in, seeing some of them getting killed, bringing more in, and 20 and 30 years from now, we'll still be discussing how we got out of Syria and Iraq. In my view, the sensible solution is to form an international coalition of which the United States must play an important role along with France, UK, Germany, powerful Western nations, but the boots on the ground, for a dozen different reasons, must be Muslim boots. I am more than aware of the enormous geopolitical problems and differences that exist in the Muslim world. To get Saudi Arabia and Iran into a room, it's a huge accomplishment because they hate each other very much. And I am more than aware of the political differences we have with Russia today. But our job is to bring together a coalition which understands that the primary function right now is to destroy ISIS, to push aside, for the moment at least, other differences of opinion. Can we work with Russia, a country that lost hundreds of people in an airliner blown up by ISIS? I think we can. Can we work with Iran? I think we can. Can we work with Saudi Arabia and other powerful countries in the region? I think we can. And the last point that I want to make on this, and I want you all to hear this, it's not talked about very much. In the Gulf region, you have some enormously wealthy countries. Countries that are controlled by a small number of families. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. Qatar, for example, many people don't know this, is a very small country, has about 250,000 citizens and a whole lot of migrant workers, but only about 250,000 citizens. Turns out, per capita, Qatar is the wealthiest country in the world today, wealthier than we are, because of their huge, huge resources in natural gas. Qatar intends to be spending over $200 billion in preparation for the 2022 World Cup, which is going to be held in Qatar. $200 billion. Well, if they can spend $200 billion on the World Cup, they can spend a hell of a lot more than they are currently spending fighting ISIS. Saudi Arabia, most people don't know this, turns out that Saudi Arabia has the third largest military budget in the world. Third largest. Maybe instead of going to war in Yemen, they also might want to turn their attention to ISIS as well. So let me just conclude by saying that as a nation, we've got some very, very serious problems. They are not going to be solved with soundbite solutions. They are not going to be solved by telling the Muslim world that none of them can visit the United States. They're not going to be solved by building a wall separating us from Mexico. They're going to be solved by a lot of serious discussion among serious people. There are those out there, historically, who have always tried to divide the American people up. I am old enough to remember TV ads that said to white workers, worry about black workers, they want to take your job. All of us can remember subtle and not so subtle statements directed to men. Watch those uppity women, they want to be your bosses, you got to stop them. We all have seen in recent years the effort to divide the straight community from the gay community. We are seeing right now an effort to tell us the people who were not born in the United States are our enemies. We got to take on immigrants. This kind of demagoguery has gone on for a long, long time. And the result of that, and the reason it goes on, is that people on top understand that when they divide us up by black against white, native-born against foreigner, men against women, gay against straight, when they divide us up, they laugh all the way to the bank. They divide us up. The antidote for that is for us to come together, for us to say that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, it is a little bit weird that in the last 30 years we have seen a massive transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. It is a little bit weird that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we are the only major country on earth doesn't guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child. It is a little bit weird that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any other major country on earth. That in this great country, millions of working class families are struggling to see their kids get a higher education. That half of the workers in this country, 55 years of age or older, have $0 in the bank saved for retirement. And you got Republicans who want to cut Social Security and cut Medicare. A little bit weird. So what I believe is that we have got to not let them divide us up. We have got to come together. I hope that all of you have the courage to think big, not small. To think big. Think about what this country can be and not get involved in petty squabbles. And that's what the political revolution is about. It is bringing millions of people together, including, as I said earlier, many who have given up on the political process. People who are prepared to stand up and fight back and create a government which works for the children, for working people, for the elderly, for the veterans, for the sick, for the poor. We can create that country if we stand together, and I ask your support in helping me make that happen. Thank you all very much. For some questions, not a whole lot. Where's the mic? Hold on one second. Bill, who's the, I got a mic there. Where else is the mic? We have, how many mics we got? 3. All right, where's one? Bill, I don't see the mic. All right, one there, one there. So why don't you go to the other side? Okay? Yeah, so why don't you start off? Somebody in that area? Okay.
Hey, my name is Mitchell Proman. I just want to say, you talk about raising the minimum wage to $15, right? So what would you say to the people who say that it can't be done or shouldn't be done? What would you say to them?
This is what I would say, and thank you very much, Mitchell, for the question. Implicit in everything that I have said is a little bit of an understanding of history of how things happen, okay? If I was standing here with you 40 years ago, and I said, I think that the United States will become mature enough, racially, that in the year 2008, an African American will be elected president of the United States. If I said that 40 years ago, people in this room would have said, you are nuts. See, you're young, and you don't know that. You take it for granted. And I'm not even, you like Obama, you don't like Obama, that's not the point. And by the way, Iowa played a huge role in that. That happens because millions of people for decades, wasn't just Martin Luther King Jr., millions of people said we are going to end racism and segregation. And obviously, we still have a long way to go. When we talk about women's rights and women's struggles, when I was mayor of Berlin, this is back in the mid-1980s, we appointed, you ready for this? Pretty radical. a woman police officer. Whoa! How wild and crazy can you be? And you're laughing. And it's good that you're laughing. Because now it's a non-issue. It wasn't a non-issue in the 1980s. That people with disabilities are now mainstreamed into public schools, you take for granted, didn't happen by accident. If we were sitting here 10 years ago, not 40 years ago, and somebody said, well, I think gay marriage will be legal in every state in the country, the overwhelming majority of young people will be supportive. Somebody here would have told me, you're crazy. That's what's happened. Why do I say all of those things? Because that is how change occurs in children. Change occurs from the bottom line up. Give you 5 years ago, if I stood before you and I said, I believe in a $15 an hour minimum wage, you would have said, whoa, pretty crazy stuff, Bernie. But you know what happened? Because people in the fast food industry and elsewhere went out on strike. And I met with those people, and I marched with those people. And they said, you know what, we can't make it on $7.25 or $8 or $9 an hour. And the American people said, yeah, we understand that. And what happened is Seattle and Los Angeles and San Francisco and other communities began to raise the minimum wage up to $15 an hour over the next few years. That's how change comes. So I have not the slightest doubt that when millions of people stand up and say loudly and clearly that a minimum wage has got to be a living wage, yes, we will achieve that goal.
I'm a future educator. I taught student taught in Chicago public schools last summer, and many of the 8th graders I taught English to were reading and learning at a 3rd grade level. What are you going to do to help the underprivileged and just disadvantaged students in schools achieve their dreams of going to college?
Well, Noah, first of all, thank you very much for going into education. When we talk about the political revolution, one of the things we are talking about is changing our national priorities. Now, I'm a big I know in Iowa football is a big deal. Got it? We in New England also watch the Patriots occasionally. But you know what? Tom Brady is a great American hero. You are more of an American hero than Tom Brady. I want us as a nation to understand that education and enhancing our educational system and our intellects, that is a lifelong pursuit. And that starts with having a first-class child care and pre-K system. It starts by making sure we adequately fund public education and we attract the best teachers that we can. And it includes making public colleges and universities tuition-free. I want to see a cultural revolution so that kids in Chicago and Burlington, Vermont, understand that it is cool, really cool to be reading and thinking and talking about ideas. Your question, or maybe instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires, we adequately fund education and child care through higher education. Got a mic over there? Yeah.
It's an honor to be here, hearing you speak. I drove here 6 hours from Springfield, Illinois. And if you remember at the Democratic debate, I was the guy, and you were getting in the car, and I reach in, and I say, here's a yarmulke that says Bernie Sanders in Hebrew and English. The reason I came up here is something that happened just 2 days ago. And I want to talk about the ethics I want to talk about the ethics of the press, and in particular of Associated Press. And I want to out them here and now. I was in a Hillary Clinton town hall in Urbandale, Iowa, and I talked about the Weed Out Hate initiative, an idea that gets righteous people of this country to teach and instruct people to weed out and relate weeding the garden with rooting out hatred. Yes. And by the time the Associated Press got done with that article, Weed Out Hate became her idea in response to what Americans do in response to fear. And the right-wing press played ping pong with the left-wing press, and it was just an unbelievable thing.
Welcome to my world. Let me ask you, you're raising an important question that has to be raised, and something that I'm very concerned about. I had hopes, truly, that in this country, which has suffered, and we're certainly not unique in this, it exists all over the world, the same racism for so many, many years. That what I see right now, and I'm seeing it with the attacks against the Latinos and the undocumented in this country, I am seeing it in the last few days against the Muslim community in this country. What I am seeing is Trump and other demagogues attempting to divide this country, to force or try to get the American people to hate somebody because of their religion or because of their country of birth. That is disgusting, that is unacceptable, and as a nation, we must reject it. But this is the way that people have often won elections. Now, Donald Trump thinks that low wages in this country are just fine. I believe he says having a low minimum wage is not a bad thing for this country. Donald Trump believes that our wages are too high. Donald Trump believes that we should give huge tax breaks to billionaires. So while they get us to try to hate Muslims or Latinos, giving huge tax breaks to billionaires and not raising the minimum wage. Our job is to be smarter than that. Our job is to stand together and say, no, we're not going to fall for it. We're not going to hate Muslims. We're not going to hate Latinos. We're going to stand together as one people and create a country that works for all of us. Okay. Phil, you got a question? Okay, yeah.
Senator Sanders, what's your personal take on public banks? As you know, North Dakota has the only public bank in the United States, and there's some students, one I know of, who has a 3% interest rate on their student loans and everything. And plus, public banks can also help build up our infrastructure and education, our roads and bridges. What's your take on that?
I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea, and I think states like Vermont can look to North Dakota, which has had that bank since the 1920s, I believe. Is that right? Started by the populist movement way back when. And it's what they do there is public money, tax money and so forth, that goes into the bank, and then they reinvest that money to make their economy stronger and to protect the interests of their own people. I think it is a very smart idea, and I support the idea. Okay, a couple of more questions. Where's the mic? Okay, good.
My name is Joyce Lewis. I love you forever. And I want to know, are you going to help Amtrak by chance?
Absolutely. When we talk about climate change and when we talk about energy efficiency, it's not only making our buildings more energy efficient, it's also taking a very hard look at the transportation system, which uses huge amounts of energy. Our rail system today, both in terms of passenger rail and cargo, is way behind Europe, Japan, and even China in some instances. So yes, we have got to invest in our rail system move cargo much more energy efficiently than is currently the case, and move passengers as well. I believe very much in Amtrak. You're welcome. All right, maybe last question? All right.
You and I know that the system here supports businesses. Businesses brings wealth. People do good. But in many parts of the world where I come from, we don't have a system like that. So for example, like this school here, this middle school, your federal government is hiring teachers, is making your decision hundreds and thousands of miles away. How is that going to be any good? Your police?
What's your question?
My question is, U.S. already gives aid to countries like mine, Nigeria. Why don't put that, say, okay, we're going to give you aid, but we need to see these policies.
Okay, I think the question is to make sure that U.S. foreign aid is used to help the people. Is that the question?
That's correct.
Okay. There was a time, we do spend a lot of money abroad. Too often what we're doing is propping up militaries, and we're selling a lot of military equipment. I would like to see us be the country known around the world where when kids get an education or when they get health care, they can thank the people of the United States for improving their lives. So I agree with what you said. All right, let me just again thank all of you.